Hello and welcome back. Tonight we begin with something wonderfully dull. Not dull in a bad way, dull in the very best way. The kind of dull that loosens your shoulders, slows your breathing, and gently escorts your brain away from whatever it was worrying about. Before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of thing, consider subscribing and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It genuinely delights me to know that someone in Oslo or Sao Paulo, or a small town in New Zealand, is drifting off to the sound of my voice, talking about very old, very unimportant things. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's talk about Victorian passenger ships. It is sometime in the 1880s. You are boarding a large steam-powered passenger ship, somewhere on the coast of England. Perhaps Southampton, perhaps Liverpool. The exact port doesn't matter much. What matters is the smell of salt water, the distant cry of gulls, and the low, patient groan of a ship that has crossed the Atlantic many times and is in no particular hurry to explain itself. These ships were enormous by the standards of the time, not by ours. A modern cruise ship makes them look like bathtubs, but in 1880, standing at the base of one felt genuinely overwhelming. Iron hulls painted black, tall funnels releasing slow columns of coal smoke into the gray English sky. Hundreds of portholes lined up in neat rows, like the eyes of something patient and old. Boarding was a long process. There were different classes of travel, and each class boarded through different gangways. First-class passengers entered through wide carpeted ramps near the ship's bow. Second-class passengers used a different entrance midship, and third-class, or steerage passengers, filed in through the lower decks, through narrow corridors that smelled of paint and bilge water. Each group would spend the voyage in their own world, largely invisible to the others. The crew moved between all of them, of course. Stewards in white jackets, engineers in oil-stained coveralls, deckhands coiling ropes the size of your arm, and looking completely unbothered by the fact that they were about to spend 2 weeks in the middle of the ocean. The voyage from England to New York took between 7 and 12 days, depending on the weather, the ship, and the season. There was no way to make it faster. You simply had to go the speed the ocean allowed, and the ocean was not always cooperative. Let us talk about the food, because the food, as it turns out, is the most interesting part of almost any historical story. First-class passengers on Victorian ocean liners ate extraordinarily well, better arguably than most people ate on land. The dining saloon, they called it a saloon, not a dining room, was often the most beautiful room on the ship, paneled in dark wood, lit by gas lamps or on newer ships early electric light, white tablecloths, silver cutlery, the gentle rolling of the ocean, making your wine glass sway very slightly in its little holder. Dinner was the event of the day. It began around 7 in the evening and could last 2 hours or more. The menu, printed fresh each day on heavy card, might list 6 or 7 courses. Soup first, usually a clear consommé, very hot, very simple. Then fish, often something local to wherever the ship had last docked, though by mid-ocean it was more likely to be preserved or salted. Then a meat course. Roast beef was common, lamb, occasionally game birds, though game required careful management in the ship's cold storage. Then vegetables. Then a cheese course. Then dessert. Dessert was taken very seriously. Trifle, blancmange, poached pears and wine sauce, baked apples. On special occasions, elaborate molded jellies in the shape of castles or crowns that the kitchen staff had spent the better part of the afternoon assembling. And then coffee. And then, for those who wished it, port and cigars in the smoking room, while the ocean moved quietly beneath the hull. It was, in the grand scheme of things, a very pleasant way to cross an ocean. Third-class passengers had a different experience. Not a terrible one, necessarily, but a different one. Steerage passengers were fed in large communal dining halls below decks. Long wooden tables bolted to the floor, benches without cushions. The smell of coal and salt and too many people in a confined space. The food was functional, designed to sustain, not to impress. Breakfast was typically porridge, plain, thick, warm oatmeal served in tin bowls, with a small jug of milk if you were lucky, or simply hot water if you were not. Bread, sometimes butter, coffee that had been brewed very strong, and then watered down significantly. Lunch was soup, almost always soup. A thick broth with barley or dried peas floating in it. Sometimes a small piece of salt beef dissolved into the liquid. Bread again. Hardtack biscuits if the bread had run low. Dinner was the largest meal. Boiled meat, usually beef or mutton, overcooked to the point where it required no real chewing, just patience. Boiled potatoes, occasionally a vegetable, though vegetables didn't survive long at sea, and by day 5 of the voyage, most of the fresh produce was simply gone, replaced by tinned carrots or preserved cabbage that smelled strongly of brine, and yet remarkably, passengers in third class rarely complained about the food, not because it was good, but because many of them had eaten considerably worse on land. Emigrant families from Ireland, Poland, Germany, and Italy were, in many cases, boarding these ships, precisely because food had been scarce at home. A bowl of hot porridge on a rocking ship was, by comparison, a form of abundance. No account of Victorian ocean travel is complete without addressing seasickness. It was, by all accounts, absolutely dreadful. The ships of the 1880s lacked the stabilizing technology of modern vessels. They rolled. They pitched. They heaved in ways that the human inner ear found deeply objectionable. The Atlantic Ocean in winter was particularly uncharitable. Passengers in first class retreated to their cabins and lay in their narrow bunks staring at the ceiling, waiting for the ordeal to end. Stewards moved quietly through the corridors, delivering small crackers and glasses of flat ginger water, neither of which helped very much. In third class, where the lower decks amplified every movement of the sea, seasickness could render entire families prostrate for days. The communal dining hall emptied out on rough crossings. The food went largely uneaten. The kitchen staff, somewhat grateful for the reduced workload, pressed on. There were remedies, of course. Fresh air was recommended. Passengers who could manage it were encouraged to sit on the upper deck wrapped in wool blankets, staring at the horizon, which was said to stabilize the senses. Whether it helped is debated. What it certainly did was make the person feel they were doing something, which in the absence of actual relief was almost as good. Some passengers swore by brandy, others by raw ginger. A popular pamphlet of the era recommended eating a light biscuit before rising in the morning and avoiding rich food entirely, advice which was largely ignored by everyone in first class who had not crossed an ocean to eat lightly. Between meals and weather events, the days on board were largely uneventful, which was, for many passengers, the point. First-class passengers read in the ship's library, a modest collection of novels, travel books, and improving literature, all bolted to the shelves to prevent them sliding off in rough weather. They played cards in the smoking room. They walked slow circuits of the upper deck in their overcoats, nodding to acquaintances and breathing the cold salt air. Musicians sometimes performed in the evenings, a small string quartet or a solo pianist in the first-class saloon, playing waltzes and light operatic pieces, while passengers finished their dessert and their port. There were no films, no radio, no telegraph communication with shore. Once the ship was more than a day out of port, the ocean in this era was a genuine separation. You were neither here nor there, suspended between one life and another. Many passengers found this unexpectedly restful. Letters were written that could not be sent. Diaries were kept. Hours were spent simply watching the water, which is, when you consider it carefully, one of the oldest and most reliable methods of doing absolutely nothing while feeling vaguely philosophical about it. The sea was gray mostly, occasionally green, sometimes in the right light, a deep and particular shade of blue that had no real name and that passengers reached for in their diaries with words like vast and eternal, and then gave up and wrote very blue indeed. And so the days passed, slowly, punctually, marked by meal bells and weather changes, and the steady turning of the ship's great engines somewhere below. By the time the coast of America appeared on the horizon, a thin dark line that grew gradually into something real, passengers had been remade by the crossing, not dramatically, not in the way stories require, but quietly, the way that any long, uninterrupted passage of time remakes a person. They had eaten their porridge. They had watched the sea. They had slept in narrow bunks to the rhythm of the Atlantic. And they arrived, as most people do after a long journey, tired, a little changed, and ready for whatever came next. Thank you for listening. If you'd like more of this sort of thing, quiet histories, slow facts, the unremarkable corners of remarkable eras, subscribe. There are many more dull and beautiful things to discuss. Sleep well.